Good afternoon. I hope everyone is keeping cool during the beginning of the summer. If you are joining from the Northern Hemisphere, thank you for being here with us and welcome to another edition of the EU DisinfoLab webinar series. Actually, it's the last one before the summer break. EU DisinfoLab, as you may know, is a non-profit organization gathering knowledge and expertise on disinformation in Europe. My name is Raquel Miguel. I'm part of the research team, and I am very honored to moderate a session on foreign information manipulation and interference, also known as FIMI. We will speak about a new Russian influence operation that has been uncovered by the European External Action Service and further research by the intelligence company Recorder Future. We have titled this webinar False Façade and CopyCop, two names for a new Russian influence operation, to illustrate the work that both organizations have done. And this session will be a bit different because we will have two speakers today to cover the two investigations. But before introducing them, let me mention a few housekeeping rules. If you are a regular attendee, you already will know that this session is being recorded and the playback will be available shortly on our YouTube channel. And for communication purposes and for the Q&A session, we will be using Slido. You can open the app on your phone by scanning the QR code you currently see on the screen, or by typing in your web browser slido.com and when requested, adding the hashtag disinfo. Please don't use the chat on Zoom. Let's get some audience interaction by inviting you to answer two questions. Please tell us where are you joining us from today and which sector you represent. Quick reminder for the latecomers, slido.com, hashtag disinfo. I will give you a minute, and in the meantime, let me please remind that you are in one of the webinars that the EU DisinfoLab is regularly hosting for the counter disinformation community, a space dedicated to the best experts in the field, such as Beatriz and Clément, to stay up to date on research, policy, and responses to disinformation. Okay, let's have a look at the responses. Now, we have people from Brussels, mostly, but also Lisbon, Italy, London, Finland, and Berlin. And regarding the sectors covered, let's have a look to the next. Okay, mostly business, EU institutions, and non-government organizations, and international organizations and EU institutions, but also people from academia and other sectors. From this moment on, our audience can submit questions on Slido as well, and we will come back to them after the end of the presentations. Without any further delay, let's get started. Beatriz Marin from the European External Action Service and Clément Briens from Recorder Future will present their main findings on a new FIMI operation involving the creation and dissemination of pro-Russian content. Beatriz and Clément, welcome, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Let's start with Beatriz. Beatriz Marin is a data analyst in the FIMI and Information Integrity Division in the European External Action Service. She leads digital investigations and develops strategies for detecting and responding to FIMI. Prior to EEAS, she has worked in DG Communication and DG Connect in the European Commission. Beatriz, the EEAS, in collaboration with the Spanish authorities, were the first to uncover the operation and dubbed it False Façade, in a reference to the aim of obscuring the origins of the information and laundering the content before targeting Western audiences. Looking forward to listening to your findings. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I prepared some slides, so I will share the presentation. Thank you, Raquel. Thank you, the DisinfoLab, for the invitation. You already mentioned, but I want to praise also colleagues in the Spanish government, because this was a joint investigation with our excellent team of analysts and also with contributions from colleagues in the Spanish government. So I think it's an example of how it's changing information we can gather better results and then put them together. And we published this investigation. We worked on it for several months, and we published in April and May an article on Universities Info and also a technical report of this operation that was targeting the West, including some EU countries. And we could find that it was orchestrated from Russia. We call it the False Façade operation because they tried to create a new network, a kind of a wall of false media outlets that were laundering information from Russian state-controlled media, and they were trying to penetrate EU audiences. If we share the slides, or if you go to the website of the Universities Info, you will find the articles and the report for those that they didn't have the chance to look at it yet. At the time that we published the article, we uncovered 23 websites that were mimicking or simulating Western media outlets, all of them trying to target audiences in English, or one of the websites specifically was in French. And this network was involved in an information laundering scheme in two different ways. The first way was by feeding the Russian ecosystem with news. They were taking content from non-reliable platforms or content that was not verified. It was published videos, for example, or posts published on social media. They were taking this content, writing articles, and then Russian state-affiliated media, they were taking this article as a reference and amplifying the content. The other way how this information laundering scheme worked was by amplifying the news from the Russian ecosystem. That means that these media outlets were taking content previously published by Russian state-controlled media outlets, normally in Russian. They were taking the article, automatically translating it in English, and then offering it in this network of websites. And there was another layer of amplification, because there were several networks and also networks on Telegram that were taking the content from these outlets and were amplifying it and translating it in more EU languages. We discovered that this network started operating in August 2023, but so the first website was created that date, but also we saw how the number of channels increased, especially in the spring of 2024. And at the time of the publication of the report, we also saw that there were some other dormant channels that were not activated yet. And especially some weeks ago, we could see how, in view of the French elections, there were new websites created, and they were connected to this network. I will give more details at the end of the presentation. The most relevant example of this network was published between the 31st of March and the 4th of April. There was a non-attributed channel that uploaded a video on YouTube, theory featuring a real estate agent stating that Ukrainian President Zelensky had purchased a villa from King Charles III, worth over 20 million. This narrative of Zelensky trying to leave Ukraine, we know that it's a recurrent narrative pushed by Russian media. The following day of the publication of this video on YouTube, we saw that there was a website called London Courier that used the video, the content of this video, and wrote an article on this story. And then the information of this article was later covered and quoted by Russian state-controlled media, for example, Newsfront. Also, there were Russian diplomatic accounts that interacted and re-amplified the article of London Courier, for example, the Russian embassy in South Africa. Also, there were non-attributed Telegram channels that we know that they interact heavily with the Russian infosphere in the EU, that they translated the content of this article in English into other EU languages, like for example, German. And additionally, we also found more amplification and translations of this content in more EU languages like Spanish, French, and Polish by the Pradva network. Probably you heard already about this network that was referenced in the last Portal Kombat investigation by Virginium as a network that normally do not produce original content, but they massively amplify publications from Russian and pro-Russian and the pro-Russian ecosystem. And this is exactly what they did in this case. They took the content from London Courier and they translated into other EU languages. Probably you saw this story because there were many international fact checkers that they debunked this narrative. And in the EEAS, we tried to understand what was beyond the narrative and how this website was connected to a bigger network, to this network that at the end we found by the time 23 sites. We saw that these 23 sites, they shared technical and behavioral indicators. In the technical indicators, and that's why we can connect them and say that they belong to the same network, we found that 18 of these websites were using the same subdomain for the ID tracker. The ID tracker is an identifier that each website has. So basically we can, when we find that there are multiple websites sharing this same subdomain and the ID tracker, then it suggests that these websites are probably administered by the same owner or the same entity. Also, another indicator that we found is that they had a common IP address, also a registered company, and the creation date and servers. 14 of these subdomains were established within a relatively short time frame, ranging from the 6th of January to the 3rd of April 2024. So this was the peak where we mentioned that there were more creation of channels connected to this network. And also 8 of these channels or websites were hosted on their 2 Russian IP addresses, also overseen by the same agency within the Russian Federation. Also, another indicator was the use of the similar names for the common file names. There were 15 websites that they employed the same common file name to reference to same images. So it was the same image published across the different websites, and they all had the same file name. And also they were using the same similar branding, templates, name styles. For example, with the names, we saw that plenty of these websites, they try to resemble names of Western media outlets. They incorporate names of cities in the US, but also in the UK, followed always by the terms weekly or daily or chronicle, Times or Courier. Also, they used 9 of them the same WordPress theme. It was a theme called Zin by Code TP. And also 11 of these websites, they had visual resemblances, for example, the logos. So possibly because they were generated through artificial intelligence and using tools like DALL-E 3. And then added to these technical indicators, we saw some behavioral indicators that lead us to attribute the network geographically to Russia. For example, we saw that there was the use of the Cyrillic alphabet in the file names, but also there were mistakes in the automatic translation of the articles. For example, in the initial phases of the creation of the websites, we saw that there were automatic translations of articles into English, and we saw that basically this copy-paste didn't work really well. And at the beginning, there were still websites that they were keeping the original text in Russian. Also, we know that the IP addresses, some were located in Russia, also under the same Russian registered entity. And also one of the behavioral indicator is this pattern that we explained at the beginning, where we saw that there was a systematic republication of original content from Russian state-controlled media. So they were laundering content from Russian state-controlled media outlets, but also Russian state-controlled media outlets were laundering the content from this network of websites. So there was a heavy interaction with attributed Russian media outlets. And also we saw a heavy interaction of these websites with channels that they belong to the Russian infosphere. As I mentioned, after the publication of the report, we continue monitoring this network. And recently, on the 22nd of June, we saw that there was a new domain connected to the same infrastructure, and it appeared targeting the French elections. The name of this domain was France en Colère. So 4 days after the creation of this website, we saw how this domain published an article mentioning that Macron basically promised French citizens with 100 euros if they vote for his political party. This article published in France en Colère featured screenshots of in theory, a real domain called Ensemble-24 as a source of the content. And this site normally, according to this information, had one banner reporting that people voting for Ensemble, then they would get this voucher, this Macron bonus of 100 euros. And also following the instructions on how to get and how to apply for this bonus. What happens is that we could attribute the France en Colère website to the False Façade network, but also we realized that in theory, the domain that was promoting this Macron bonus was also a new website that was registered on the 19th of June, and it was an impersonation of the authentic website of the French political coalition Ensemble. We discovered these, and it was before the first round of the elections in France, and we used our channels on EU versus Disinfo also to expose the event and also attribute this new website to the previous network of websites that we explained in the technical report that we published in May. And I will stop here. I'm sure that Clément will have many interesting details to add to this operation.
Thank you, Beatriz, for this insightful presentation and also for the updates. Let's hand the floor over to Clément. Clément Briens is a senior threat intelligence analyst at Recorded Futures Insect Group since 2022, specializing in technical influence operations analysis, domain analysis, and threats using generative AI. Clément, you chose a different name for this campaign, CopyCop, putting an emphasis on the use of generative AI. This research has attributed the campaign to specific threat actors and has also highlighted connections amongst different Russian campaigns, such as Doppelganger, InfoRos, and Portal Kombat. And after your first report in March, you published a second one recently, following the evolution of the campaign and providing also with new insights. Looking forward to hearing your findings and updates. Over to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for having me today. As you can see, my voice is a little croaky today. It wouldn't be EU DisinfoLab if we weren't also watching the Euros. So today I'll just be covering sort of what we've observed in terms of CopyCop's use of generative AI specifically. So CopyCop is our name for the same network. It's the same network as False Façade, which was just described. We chose CopyCop to sort of poke a little bit of fun at one of the suspected operators called John Mark Dugan, who's an ex-American law enforcement officer who fled to Russia in 2016. So that sort of informed our choice for the name. So as we just mentioned, so Recorded Future, so we're an American cybersecurity company with Swedish roots. I'm a French citizen, so obviously I'm very interested in sort of like what's happening in terms of disinformation targeting European and French elections specifically. So we published 2 reports, the first on May 9th, and then the second in June as well. We saw a massive increase after our first 2 reports jointly. Sort of 3 days after ours, we saw the network expand to over 120 domains from the sort of like roughly 12. Yeah, we were able to draw a lot more insights after this first sort of expansion. But before I get started on CopyCop's use of AI specifically, I do want to sort of talk a little bit about AI and its role in disinformation at the moment. So for a minute, I just want you to imagine a graph where the x-axis is time and the y-axis is malicious use of AI and increasing AI capabilities. So for the last year or two, roughly since ChatGPT has come out, I think expectations have risen very quickly and very high in terms of the threat that AI is supposed to pose in terms of enabling disinformation. And in my opinion, I think the expectations have inflated a little too quickly to the point of where we were seeing headlines talking about existential threats to democracy. When I think in reality, you know, with AI sort of developing, starting with ChatGPT, now we're on multimodal models like GPT-4o. It's much more iterative development of capabilities. They're slowly building and sort of reaching that point. So I think that malicious use of AI is also following this sort of iterative process. And I'd say that right now we're right here with CopyCop in terms of how they're using AI. They're using good models. It's nothing crazy so far, so I'm going to go into very specific details. But we're not quite at the Skynet sort of assessment that we were having 6 months ago. And so if we go back to this, in my opinion, the risk is that because we have these very inflated expectations about sort of existential threats of AI, that we tend to dismiss anything that doesn't reach these very high expectations that we set for ourselves. So here I included a headline where a top cyber expert said that generative AI in disinformation is overblown, which I do not agree with. But so I'm just going to conclude this first part by just saying I have 3 recommendations. First is don't panic. AI isn't going to replace our jobs. It's not posing an existential threat to democracy, at least not today. But 2, that doesn't mean we should ignore it. And 3, I think the best way to sort of sum it up is a quote from Ben Nimmo, who is formerly head of investigations at Meta and Graphica, now head of investigations at OpenAI, who qualified the sort of advance of malicious use of AI as evolution, not revolution. So I just want you guys to keep this in mind as I go through some of the specific examples. So in terms of CopyCop specific use of generative AI, we broadly saw it across 3 different categories. So first, the articles, the inauthentic articles that they were publishing, so across the title, body, and some of the tags. Next, they used AI to develop some of the inauthentic personas on some of their websites. And third, for the branding, so including logos and potentially the domains. So one of the first applications of generative AI that we saw that was quite obvious in some places was for the actual titles of the articles, and we saw some interesting patterns. So for example, in our most recent report, we talked about how we would see these headlines with special report and then a number, or quick take and then a number. So quick take 82, 38, so on and so forth. We've also seen straight up some, sort of error messages that are typical of large language models like ChatGPT. So for example, sorry, I'm not able to assist with that. Please provide a different topic or question. So most often, these are just the examples where we could tell that the AI is being used. This is a tiny minority of the actual articles that we've been seeing. Most of them, the titles are actually pretty good, pretty concise. But this is how we've been sort of able to find evidence that they're using it for the title. Now, this is probably the most interesting part, is how are they actually using AI to write the contents of the articles. So as mentioned before, what we found is that we found a lot of these articles directly plagiarizing a lot of news sources. Originally, the news sources were mostly plagiarizing from Russian media, like Gazeta, RU, and Fox, Al Jazeera, TV5 Monde, La Croix as well. Now we've seen the network sort of expand its range of sources that's plagiarizing and scraping articles from. So that includes French media like Le Parisien, Le Figaro, UK news outlets, also a lot of conservative leaning US outlets like Breitbart, the New York Post, the Washington Examiner, so on and so forth. And so what we think is happening is that they have an automated pipeline where they're scraping a lot of these articles, they're submitting it to the AI with their prompts, which aims to introduce a specific bias into the contents of the article. So yes, of course, they are translating it, but they're also shaping the contents to fit the sort of narratives that they're helping launder. So we actually found some of the prompts that were mistakenly included in the body of the articles. So this one, for example, is pretty telling. Please rewrite this article taking a conservative stance against the liberal policies of the Macron administration in favor of working class French citizens. So this prompt really shows how granular they're sort of getting with their targeting as well. They're aiming, they're aiming this content at specific demographics. So for example, working class French citizens, and really sort of like pinning down the specific bias that they're introducing. And you can see in the second prompt as well, that the AI was asked to highlight the cynical tone towards the US government, NATO, and US politicians, while emphasizing the perception of Republicans, Trump, and Russia, which is an interesting list, of course, of entities to emphasize. So yeah, this was even more evidence that we found that this was using generative AI. Now, so we're not completely sure about this, but we do. I mean, my personal hypothesis is that they're even using this for the tags in the articles. Some of these kind of make sense if they were done manually, but a lot of them are just kind of weird. For example, a tag for a probation interview or a misdemeanor, I think it's pretty strange if you're a journalist to be using those types of tags. And there's roughly like a similar number of tags on each article, which would lead me to say that this is potentially something that they're doing with generative AI. Now, so this was pretty interesting. We also across the 120 websites, on average, every website has between 10 and 20 inauthentic journalists on them. So that are tagged on each of the articles. You can click through to their profile and you'll see a description. And what we found by sort of scraping and then analyzing the text of all these descriptions of these journalists is that the network employs a lot of accomplished journalists. They're Pulitzer Prize winning accomplished journalists with years of experience and a keen eye for detail, which we thought was really funny. But it sort of shows some of the patterns and potentially, sort of like betraying a little bit of the prompt that they're using as well to write these descriptions. Now, as mentioned previously as well, we've seen sort of the network using most likely DALL-E 3 from OpenAI to generate a lot of the branding. So that includes both the logos that are displayed on the websites, or very often, if it's not displayed directly on the website, it'll also be used as a favicon. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but so some are quite obvious, like this one that I have sort of like zoomed out. You can see pretty clearly that the letters are all wrong and kind of weird. Some others, might just pass as a legitimate website if the logo is pretty simple. This is another hypothesis that we have. We're not entirely sure about this, but in our second report, we discussed how out of the 120 new domains, a lot of them are sort of pivoting towards being themed for the US elections, and a lot of them are very similar, using similar keywords. So for example, we have these cluster of conservative domains, republic, policy, red state, blue state, purple, patriotic, right, so on and so forth. And so we think it's a realistic possibility that AI is being used to a certain degree to come up with these names, and then that they would be able to check for the domains and register them using APIs. We don't have strong evidence of this, but it is a hypothesis. So what does this all sort of like do, and how does it contribute to the operations? Well, obviously, like AI is extremely useful for these networks to publish content at scale. We actually published a report in March where we did experiment with AI internally at Recorded Future, and we found that when you compare the price of generating a good article on a fake website, you compare the price of those API calls with the average salary of a troll farm worker in countries like Macedonia or the Philippines, that actually AI makes it 100 times cheaper to produce content. So of course it makes it really cheap to produce a lot of content at scale. But what we found actually is that AI in this case is being used to establish credible assets. So when CopyCop or False Façade, you know, publishes those specific stories like the 20 million, manor being bought by Zelensky, or the Bugatti story that came out recently, what happens is when people click on these articles, they'll be led to websites that have a huge backlog of articles and these fake journalists. And the average social media user is more likely to sort of believe that this is a real publication if it sort of demonstrates that that credibility and all of those, you know, sort of aesthetic assets as well. So this is a graph of the 120 websites and like some of the overlap in terms of the assets that they were reusing amongst them. Now, another component of sort of CopyCop's use of AI, of course, is the use of deepfakes, which have been documented very broadly recently. So you'll probably recognize the guy on the left there in the car. That's from the Bugatti story that broke last week. So amongst this sort of like sea of AI generated content, CopyCop's also been publishing, you know, very targeted human crafted pieces of influence content, which most often use either AI generated audio or video deepfakes. And so when analyzing these deepfakes, of course, it's very hard to prove exactly that it's a deepfake. It's more like an uncanny valley thing where you just watch it and it just kind of looks weird and the mouth doesn't move with the voice. But at Recorded Future, we found that actually analyzing the audio and sort of, you know, the actual original language and how it sounds to native speaker, that's been our most consistent method in terms of detecting manipulation. And so typically, as mentioned earlier, you know, these videos are uploaded to YouTube and then linked on the CopyCop websites, which, you know, or look like credible newspapers. But now they're actually moving away from YouTube and posting them directly on the websites as well. So I just want to give you a better idea of like what we're dealing with here with like this AI enabled influence. So I'm just giving you this one example. So this is one of the websites called Daybreak Digest. This one specifically, it plagiarizes Russia Today, Breitbart, and Fox News. It has 10 fake journalists, and it publishes, you know, 10 to 20 articles per day. And across this volume, you know, there's like less than probably 0.1% of these articles that are targeted deepfakes. Now, this is roughly 12 to 1,400 articles displayed here. This is the daily output of the network. And the question is, amongst the sea of content, can you spot the deepfake? Can you identify the content that's being engineered and amplified by the wider Russian disinformation system? This is a major problem for researchers. It's getting increasingly hard. Of course, there's techniques, you know, to detect if there's videos attached to the article, so on and so forth. But this is the sort of thing that we're dealing with at the moment. The real danger, in my opinion, is that some of these deepfakes are performing a lot better than the AI-generated contents. The AI-generated contents, you know, these sort of thousands of articles that are published monthly, are getting very little rates of engagement. However, the deepfakes, for example, the Bugatti deepfake that you know, blew up last week, got over 18 million views in less than 24 hours. There's another risk as well with the AI-generated articles, which is that they're most likely using AI to do search engine optimization on the contents of the article, which means that now when there's real news websites that break stories, they are getting competition from these fake AI websites who are, you know, sort of publishing thousands of articles on specific topics and who actually show up in search results. They do show up on the first page of Google results. Recently, NewsGuard put out an excellent report talking about how this is actually feeding back into AI chatbots as well. So now when you use, you know, ChatGPT or Perplexity or Google or whatever model, they now have the ability to browse the internet and give you an answer. And the problem is that the AI chatbots aren't necessarily making the difference between these fake AI websites and real news organizations. So they actually found that a certain number of this sort of top commercial LLMs and chatbots were actually, you know, using CopyCop sources to sort of support their answers. So yeah, this is an increasing danger in my opinion. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. I do think that AI detection is possible. These actors are still making a lot of mistakes and they're leaving a lot of artifacts, which are, you know, sort of allowing us to identify this as being AI. Deepfake forensics, it does remain an emerging discipline. There's not a lot of technical consensus as to how we should investigate and attribute deepfakes to specific actors. One positive point that I'll leave is that AI is becoming extremely useful to actually analyze AI-generated text at scale, and sort of very quickly identify and traverse different, pieces of content and sort of identify the key narratives that are within it. So I've just included a screenshot from our product, The Recorded Future. We've actually integrated AI. And so this is actually a summary of all of our CopyCop sources. So we sort of, get like bullet points of all the narratives that have been published on any given day. So AI is also going to be helpful in analyzing these threats as well. Yeah, so thank you very much. That's it for me today. I've just left the QR codes to our 2 reports. I promise it's not malware. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Clément and Beatriz, for sharing with us such a well-rounded overview with 2 different perspectives that complement each other so well, I think. It's time to start the Q&A session. As a reminder, please use the QR code to join Slido or type slido.com #disinfo. We have around 20 minutes for questions. And we have plenty of them already, but I'm going to take advantage of my role as moderator, and I'll give the first one. We have titled this webinar 2 names for one Russian operation because we wanted to stress how researchers can investigate the same topic and still give different names. Do you think it's necessary to harmonize names in order to allow the research community to connect the dots more easily and make it more streamlined for others? What is your take on that, any of you?
I don't know if you want, I can start. I don't have a really strong opinion because I understand that as it happened in this case, this was months of investigations that we didn't know that there were other people working. We could imagine. But when you do your own report, you just choose a name, and then it happens that some days after there is another organization that they were already working on this and they chose a different name. I think maybe harmonization can happen after. It happens also with the Doppelganger and the RRN case. It's just sagas of the same network, and maybe if at some point we attribute this network to a doppelganger, then it will become doppelganger. We don't know. So I think it's important that, I don't know, in this case, I see that the results were totally complementary. It's just that, yeah, maybe for the audience, sometimes it's difficult to keep track of everything that the analyst community is doing, and it's difficult to connect the dots, and maybe we should do it better in the future. I don't know.
You want anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. So first of all, I agree completely with what Beatriz said, and I'll give you some perspective from us as so Recorded Future is a cybersecurity company, right? Like, we're in threat intelligence. Typically, like, we sort of report a lot more on like nation state activity, cybercrime, so on and so forth. In the sort of like in the sphere of threat intelligence in the strictly cyber sense, the problem is that we don't have perfect visibility into what everyone else is saying and doing. So as a matter of policy, we don't grandfather names. So if somebody writes about a specific network, and it's research that we've also worked on, and we see that there's overlap, but we're not 100% sure, then we're not going to use the same name, because if you put a lot of research into a specific network and then we show up and we say, oh, actually, this is the same network, we use the same name, and we're describing behavior that you don't agree with as the person who has named the network, that's a problem. So in this case, I think it was more fortuitous. I think we had also been working on this research for a couple of months. I don't think we were aware that we were both working on it, but again, like Beatriz said, like, I think it's very complementary, and also good to see different perspectives, and also that we agreed on a lot of the findings as well, and in some of the analysis. So I think it's really great as well that you have different organizations, of course, working on the same networks, different names. I don't think it's too much of a big deal. I think what matters is that we get that information out there and that we enable the relevant stakeholders to, be able to respond to these deep fakes and stories as they come out. And yeah, I think that's what we should be focusing on.
Thank you so much, both of you. There are a couple of questions in the chat related to CopyCop investigation. The audience members are asking if you build on the EEAS first investigation or if your research was completely independent, and they are also curious about the methodology you were based for the detection of AI generated content, and also how could you identify specific large language model prompts used by CopyCop operators? These three questions are for you.
Yeah, lots of questions. All right. So I'll start with, wait, sorry, can you scroll back to the first? Yes, okay, so we built our research based on Clemson University, who published a report in December. I think they were the first to speak about the network. They spoke about DC Weekly and a couple of the other websites, and then we started from there. So yeah, I mean, I assume like for Beatriz, like these investigations take time. I mean, not only does the actual technical investigation take a lot of time, but the actual production of the report, when it's like 30, 40-page reports like ours, like, it takes a lot of time. We would have loved to have published it earlier, but we didn't. And fortuitously, we published it the same week, which is great. So yeah, and I recommend checking out as well Clemson University's report on the topic as well. For the second, in our report, you explained that these operations did not have any effect on the voting process in France. I don't recall saying that specifically. I think that's we discuss impact perhaps, and we say that the deepfakes generated more engagement than the AI generated content. I think, as always, like for any type of disinformation, demonstrating impact is extremely difficult. I'm personally not convinced that this network has had a big impact on the voting process in France, simply because a lot of the sort of audiences are English speaking. I'm not sure how many actual French voters saw this content. And also, like, a lot of it wasn't really targeted at France. A lot of it's still targeted to Zelensky and so on. There are a couple narratives here and there that tried to sort of undermine, I think, the Macron administration quite broadly, but I'm personally not convinced. But if Nathan, if you have any information that I'm not aware of, then I would be more than happy to discuss it with you specifically.
There is actually another question related to the effectiveness of the InfoOp. Someone is asking how can you assess this effectiveness of one information operation, and in this specific case, considering its multi-platform dimension that cannot be fully monitored.
Sorry, do you have the question up on the screen? That was a bit of a long one.
Yes, maybe Beatriz has any insight at this respect. Do you have any method to assess the effectiveness of a campaign, and specifically this one?
It's really complicated to measure the impact because which type of impact are we discussing here? I don't know, economic impact, or impact in public health, or impact on public perception of a topic. So there are different ways of measuring the impact. And also we know that information manipulation normally will work by repetition, not by the impact of one big story. So it's something, I think, really complex. And I know that it's a question that we receive in many cases. Also, if I talked to some researchers that they were specialized on measuring impact, and they reached the conclusion that actually it's almost impossible, in the sense that just to assess the impact that story has, you should have assessed the same situation without that story, to basically compare which circumstance would have happened in each case. So it's something like extremely complex, I guess, to find an objective way to measure impact, although you can always have some indicators. But refer to the consequality, or that one thing is a consequence of one FIMI incident or one campaign. It's always complex to measure, at least with objective and quantitative indicators.
Yes, maybe related with this question that is mentioned in the multi-platform dimension of CopyCop. There is another one that asks about threat actors are not just creating content, but also new platforms, self-hosted video sharing platform and a forum. Does this mean an increase in the threat? I guess they are referring to the first CopyCop report, Clément.
Yeah, definitely. So, so in that first report, yes, you're completely right. They at some points we think it's Jean-Marc Dugan. We think hosted a like this sort of open source self-hosted like video sharing like YouTube alternative and a forum. I don't think those are online anymore. Back then, we didn't really know what the objective was, but they didn't last very long. So I don't think it meant an increase in threat. I think it was probably experimentation at that stage. I don't think it really resulted in anything specific.
Mm-hmm. The audience is also curious about what are the most common information campaign tactics that you are coming across. Can you give an overview?
I don't know. I mean, the variety it's really big, but I would say that lately also maybe because we are too much focused on the doppelganger cases, but impersonations are, I think, a big issue right now.
Okay. Next question is about methodology for the detection of AI-generated content. I think you already replied this at least partially, Clément. Do you believe this is helping them reach any new audiences or broaden their effect? I don't know if this question relates to the AI technologies or the creation of new platforms, but maybe we can think about how these tactics used by these threat actors are helping them to reach new audiences. Any insights here?
I mean, I think like certainly for certainly in terms of the laundering approach of laundering, you know, these sort of like Russian state narratives or you know, sort of like your pro-Russian narratives. I think the way that it is sort of working is that, you know, it's rebranding these narratives as coming from your local newspaper, you know, like the Chicago Crier, the Miami Chronicle. So I think at least their objective is to broaden their reach. I think NewsGuard specifically in their report about the network, they spoke about how Dugan, who's suspected to be one of the main operators, knows very well the value of local newspapers and the role that they play in the US. A lot of people in the US sort of, you know, will of course, you know, sort of pay attention to some of the national newspapers, but will also place a lot of faith, sort of institutional trust into those like local newspapers. So I think that was potentially the objective. I think in practice, the way it's worked is that there's a consistent set of pro-Russian influencers who have been amplifying a lot of the websites. So, for example, VLC Cossack, Adrien Bouquet, Sanya in Florida, who have their existing audiences, but I'm not sure these are really new audiences that they're conquering per se, because all of these influencers, you know, have their own little echo chambers and followers on Telegram and stuff. So I think sort of like rebranding these narratives as like local newspapers was the objective, but I'm not sure they've really achieved it. A lot of this is just going back into the wider existing Russian disinformation ecosystem. Beatriz, I'm not sure whether you agree with that or.
No, yeah, I totally agree. It's just a rebranding on the same thing. It can be transferred to a new echo chamber, let's say, or outside the ecosystem if then media outlets that are outside the ecosystem, they just confuse or they don't know who are they and they just republish. So I think it's a way to resell the same message in the same audience, but also maybe facilitating, because the big names, say the affiliated media, we already know who is behind this, but these are new outlets. And if they give visibility, or if, for example, the story of the house that Zelensky bought, it was a big story and it had many views, for example, just the video. So this from outside, it looks like it could be a reliable media outlet. And then if somebody picks up on that and amplifies the content, it's where they can gather another type of audience that they didn't have in the past. But I agree with your assessment. I think it's mainly circulating in the same ecosystem.
There are 2 questions in the chat referring to Doppelganger, that it's another FIMI campaign that we all know quite well. One of them refers to Doppelganger operates similarly, copying Western news sites and creating scams. What's the difference between both operations? Is it a different actor or actors?
For what I can say from our publications, also some weeks ago, we had another technical report on the activities of the Doppelganger network during the European elections. We based our results on what was previously done by the DisinfoLab, by other organizations, and at least the part that we covered was different in the sense that what we explained in this technical report is the part referring to the impersonations of real media outlets. At the end, the CopyCop or the False Façade network, they are not impersonating real media outlets. They are just trying to present themselves as if they were reliable outlets. So I think this is one difference between one campaign and the other one, but I'm sure that other people that investigated more Doppelganger, they can find more connections with the network that we are discussing here today. From our side, we don't have any technical link between this campaign and Doppelganger, but of course, if we continue collecting evidences in the community, maybe it's possible that at some point we find some, not that we can attribute them, but maybe as we found, for example, with the Portal Kombat case, where Pravda is re-amplifying the content of the False Façade. We cannot tell that it's the same operation or we can attribute it to the same actor, but we have 2 operations working together.
There is another question related to Doppelganger. After Doppelganger new revelations today, did you find any activity based on European soil in CopyCop and False Façade? Maybe just to give a bit of context to our audience, we can say that today we have seen new revelations concerning Doppelganger. The Swedish ONG Curium, in partnership with media outlets such as the German Corrective, published a new set of evidence around the operation. The findings highlight how the infrastructure of the campaign relies partially in companies operating on European soil. And there is also evidence showing the convergence between cyber criminal activities and information operations. So just to give context before letting you answer the question, there is any activity that you detected that is based on European soil in your specific campaign, the campaign that you investigated?
So I think not really. I don't think we have much evidence of it. I think for Doppelganger, it's a massive amount of infrastructure. It's thousands of domains, millions of bots at this point. So there was this sort of necessity to have like a very like sprawling infrastructure that goes across a lot of European countries, but also Singapore, Malaysia, like a bunch of other countries. For CopyCop originally, so like Beatriz mentioned in her presentation, originally, you know, most of the infrastructure was hosted in Moscow. Now, you know, we think that this like new wave of 120 domains, they're mostly based on digital ocean servers located in the US. So I personally haven't seen any specific European infrastructure being used. But yeah, maybe Beatriz, you have more to say on this.
No, it's what I mentioned previously. What we found geographically, we could find it connected to Russia. It's just that, for example, the French website, we know that they were trying to target French audiences, but the infrastructure was hosted in Russia.
Mm-hmm. And maybe also a bit connected to this, what is the impact of your research on the national responses, on the national response of states towards foreign influence? What is the uptake of national authorities? Any thoughts on this?
Maybe this is a question for national authorities. From our side, I mean, we exchanged this information, of course, with national authorities, because we have a network, the rapid alert system, where we exchange our findings with the member states. Then the application of responses, it depends on the member states. So I'm sure that they listen to not just what the EEAS discovered, but also what civil society organizations are discovering, and they keep track of the findings of the communities. Is that sometimes the activation of responses, it's more complex than it looks like. I think there was a question specifically that basically that used the term ban, how the countries could ban this type of operations. I will go back a bit to the speech of the EEAS, but it's not just ours, is that at the end responses, it's not just one type of response or just deleting content. There are other types of mechanisms that can be activated. But when it comes to these more responses related to the banning, in many cases, this is a legal type of response. So it's not that a member state or a country can just disconnect a website. They need a legal mandate, and for that the content needs to be illegal, and sometimes the content it's not illegal. So it's just that it's not so easy to apply certain types of responses.
Thank you, Beatriz, for highlighting the last question. I would like to formulate, because unfortunately we don't have any more time. So we have to wrap up the webinar, but I don't want to put an end to this webinar without further commenting a bit on the latest doppelganger revelations that have been mentioned before. If you haven't already gone through it, you can find our response in a blog post published a couple of hours ago. We think that the problem is not a lack of research or evidence about this information and how to tackle it. The problem is that there is a clear lack of enforcement from authorities to act on such illegal operations. We invite you to read the text on our website and our social media channels as well. And just before signing off, just a few more thoughts. You will be kindly requested to fill in a rating survey after the webinar, and to suggest future topics to be covered in our sessions, which will resume in August. Stay tuned for updates. And maybe this is probably a better moment than any to recap. So far this year, we have hosted 20 webinars covering a wide range of topics. And remember that if you missed any of these sessions, you can find the recordings, including the one from today, on our YouTube channel, and you can catch up. And finally, a very quick reminder that the draft program for our annual conference to be held in Riga in October is out, and that we are still accepting registrations. Remember that there are limited places. Don't lose your spot. And Thanks again, Beatriz and Clément. Thank you to Maria as well, our support behind the scenes. And thank you to everyone who attended. Have a great, lovely day and summer as well. See you soon.